For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
The jungle is so thick. Even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
I just crossed this real stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins. I'm an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and have canoed from source to sea, both the Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. Here we go, episode 85. Thanks for tuning in yet again. If this is your first time listening, thanks for checking it out. If you enjoy it, share it with an adventure buddy. Let them know there's a podcast they might like. The best way for this thing to grow is word of mouth. Okay, a few things to get to here. Canoecopia 2024 is coming up, and I will be there yet again. That is the world's largest canoe and kayak convention, outdoor expo in Madison, Wisconsin. So if you're in the Midwest area and you are going to Canoecopia, you'll listen to this before the show. Look for me out there. Introduce yourself. Say hi. What's up? I've met several of you in the past at the show, so that's always fun. That's March 8th and March 9th. I'll be giving 2 presentations at the world's largest canoe and kayak expo. Hope to see you there. Also, don't forget, I got guided trips online. 2024 dates are out. Check them out at buffaloroamer.com. We're doing some awesome wilderness canoe trips, and we'd love to have you along with us on the river. So check it out, buffaloroamer.com. Today's podcast brought to you by Fischel Paddles, makers of fine handcrafted wooden canoe paddles, and SRE Outdoors. That's sregear.com, family owned and operated outdoor gear shop. Okay, Mark Fingerhut is the guest on today's podcast. Mark is a long-distance kayaker, a canoeer, a kayaker of short distances too, I guess. He paddled the entire Missouri River. It was a 96-day trip a few years ago. Enjoyed talking with him about that and other things here on episode 85 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Mark Fingerhut. What's going on, Mark? How you doing?
Doing well. I feel like spring is here, so that means more time on the water. I love it.
Amen. Spring is in the air. Water is flowing. At least early spring is in the air. But yeah, I'm right there with you. So tell me a little bit about your paddling background. I followed I followed online your 2019 paddle of the Missouri River. So give me a little bit of background of your paddling history and story, and get a little bit of background about some of the things you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm born and raised in St. Louis, and like many here, I did a lot of float trips growing up in, teenage years, early 20s, getting down to some of the nice rivers in southern Missouri and just, sitting on a raft, drinking beer, that type of thing. And then in around 2010, I'm involved in a running club called the Hash House Harriers. And one of my buddies in the club signed up for this crazy race called the MR 340. And after one of our runs, another buddy was like, "Hey, Charlie signed up for this crazy paddle race. I'm afraid he might die, so you should do the race with him." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not? Sounds good." So that was my first MR 340 in 2010. I've done it 5 more times since then over the years, and just got exposed to the paddling community, met some incredible people, found out there's a whole community out there, and there's races, and there's people with fancy boats, and I've just basically never looked back since.
That's awesome, man. That's great to hear, and it's a cool way to get in. And so what was the step between, I want to dive into the racing and stuff, but how did you go from that to deciding, hey, I want to try and tackle the largest river in America?
Yeah, so I think over the years I learned that people not only paddle from Kansas City to St. Charles in the race. There's some people who paddle entire rivers, whether that's the Mississippi, the Missouri, other rivers around the world. But I think once I got turned on to that community of Missouri River paddlers, I was like, this is something that really is something I could see myself doing. My wife and I were in Montana on our honeymoon, and we made it to the headwaters of the Missouri. That was 2017, and I was like, you know what? Someday I'm going to be back here. Next time I'm back here, I'm putting a boat in the water here, and I'm going to St. Louis. And yeah, luckily 2 years later, I had an opportunity to take some time off work. I'm in the software industry and had quite a long career, and I asked permission to take a 3-month, actually 4-month sabbatical from my job, and luckily they said yes. And so summer of 2019, I was on the road to Montana with a kayak strapped to the top of my car.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool. Yeah, it's interesting hearing everybody's different stories about how they get to that long distance trip. All the trips are amazing, right? Whether it's like 2 days in the local stream, an afternoon on a local stream, or, you know, however many days. How long did it take you to do the Missouri?
96 days, and I actually put in on the Madison River, which is one of the three that forms the Missouri. So 100 miles up from Three Forks, Montana, I put in at West Yellowstone on the Madison River, just where the river dumps out of Yellowstone Park. Just a couple miles from Old Faithful and all those geysers is where that river kind of forms. And I did have to portage around some like Class 5 whitewaters on the Madison, but just adding that stretch to the trip was just incredible with the scenery and some of the logistical challenges I had to do. Made the trip kind of unique, not just a typical Missouri River descent.
Typical. But yeah, I know. I hear you. That's awesome. I spent 2 years. I lived 2 years in Bozeman, in Montana. Nice. There, right near the headwaters, right near all the places you're mentioning. So I spent many an afternoon paddling the headwaters, or not the headwaters, but the Madison and the headwaters of the Missouri and the Gallatin and the Jefferson there. Yeah, well versed in those early miles of the Missouri, as well as the three forks that make them up there. It's beautiful country, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Spent just a very little time there, and I can't wait to make it back and explore more of that area. It's just incredible scenery and environment there. It's awesome. Yeah, great paddling all throughout Montana. A couple of my good buddies, paddling buddies, are there, and yeah, tons of good water. But reminds me of going back to your original point. I paddled the Mississippi in 2017, and I always say, and I still think it's true, I was a similar case to you. I didn't have a long, lustrous career by any means, but I had been working at a radio station in South Dakota. And I'd been working there for 4 years, kind of for all my South Dakota lovers, which I loved it when I was there. Absolutely loved it. But, you know, I was in the middle of nowhere, South Dakota, and I was crushing it. And it's a hard place to attract good talent too. So I felt I had a little bit of leverage asking, going into my boss's office to pitch, the Mississippi trip. I was like, yeah, hey, this is the dream that I want to do. Would I be able to take 3 months off and come back? And I'd really still like to work for you guys after. And they went for it, which was awesome. But that was like the scariest part of my entire trip. One of them, at least, was like just having the goal to go in there and be like, all right, this is a dream. This is something I want to do. And, I'm going to try and make it happen, kind of whether you're on board or not, but I hope you're on board. Yep. There's definitely truth to be said that the hardest part of a trip expedition like that is getting to the starting point and, organizing your life professionally and personally to miss 3-4 months out of your life is a pretty big deal. So it's a big challenge. Yeah, absolutely. So what was your overall takeaway of that trip, of that entire journey? I mean, that's a long way, 96 days. How many miles? 2,000 something? Yeah, it ended up being just short of 2,500 total. So I think it's like 2,450, something like that, with the added 100 miles on the Madison River. But, I hear people talk about long river trips all the time, and it sounds cliche, but it's not. It's just meeting the people along the way. I got to meet so many amazing people along the river, people who are interested in my story, help me out with a place to stay or a beer or buy me a hot bite to eat or something. But the people along the way, and of course the scenery and the solitude. I think I'm fairly comfortable by myself, and it was a solo trip. So being out there days at a time, not talking to anyone, kind of cut off from the world, chance to just kind of, think about things, take it in the world of technology that we live in. I did have some good music and some podcasts along the way. But just, you get into the rhythm of paddling every day, camping, and after about 10 days on the water, you're in that routine, and time goes by very slowly, and it's extremely enjoyable. It's incredible, indescribable feeling to be out there day after day.
Yeah, I'm right on board with you. I want to hop in my boat and set off down the river now and say sayonara.
Yeah. And I'll also give my friend Shane Camden a shout out. He runs Paddle Stop New Haven. And prior to my trip in December of 2018, I had this idea that I was going to paddle the whole Missouri. And Shane called me one morning and he said, "I'm going to build you a kayak for your trip."
Wow!
And I was blown away. He builds amazing stand-up paddle boards, and he's gotten into building like Voyager canoes now. But he had never built a kayak for me. So over the course of a few months leading up to my trip, he built this amazing 20-foot cedar strip wooden kayak. I got to kind of help him out with, a little bit of the design and some of the finishing touches, just to make it something that I would love, and it would be a practical craft for my trip. And it's an artwork, a piece of art. It hangs in his brewery in New Haven on the wall. I try to take it down at least once a year to get the dust off and get it out on the river, but it's there. It's an amazing piece of work. Shane is very talented.
Man, that's awesome. I've heard that name pop up several times and kind of floating around in the paddling community that we have here. I don't know much about it though, but it seems like a kind of a special place, huh?
Yes, New Haven has really become a destination for long distance paddlers. There's the brewery there, and we do some guiding and river trips out of his shop in the brewery there. And then there's also Astral Glass, Lance and Gary are long distance paddlers, and every paddler who goes through New Haven gets to blow a glass ornament and sign the wall in their shop.
Awesome.
And it's just a very, very welcoming community on the lower part of the Missouri River.
That's cool. And that's outside of or north of St. Louis, or whereabouts is it?
Yeah, it's about an hour outside of St. Louis, up the Missouri River a bit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's great. And it's awesome, the community and the boat. I mean, geez Louise, that sounds like a dream come true. I mean, to be able to paddle the longest river, one of the mightiest rivers in America, in a custom built boat, a wood boat. I mean, wow. Talk about, just wow factor if you're a boat or a paddling person. Tell me a little bit about the boat. What were some of the features of it, and how did it paddle, and how did it handle on the trip? Yeah,
it was designed to hold a lot of gear, and so it had two separate hatches, front and back. And one of the cool things Shane was able to do is to put locks with key, open via key, for all my gear, so that if I was in a town, park the boat at the ramp, I could leave most of my gear in the boat, fairly secured. If somebody really wanted to get in the hatches, they could, but they might come by and see a lock there and be deterred from messing with it. But that was one of the cool things. It was very comfortable. It handled the big waves on some of the large reservoirs on the Missouri very well, with it being such a long boat, but very stable. And then I also actually raced that boat on the MR340 in 2020 after I got off the Missouri River trip. And with no gear in that boat, I was cruising in that thing. It moves so fast, without all that gear in it. It's not as heavy, and it just cuts through the water, and it's a great piece of work.
Yeah, there's a different feeling too about wood cutting through that water, isn't it? Just like natural material. It just kind of, it feels right.
Yeah. And one of the things I haven't really experienced much of before, but some of the parts of the the Missouri that have a ton of sediment, I'd be sitting there paddling and I would hear like a low, like shushing sound. And I was like, what the heck is that? And it's sort of the sediment just flowing by and like rubbing the side of the boat as you go through. And it's an audible sound. And that is amazing. That's very cool.
Yeah, I love that sound. I've had it happen many a time, and I want to say maybe the first time I remember it, maybe it was on the Mississippi, but I audibly, or I remember it on the Yukon vividly of paddling, and because I think at that time I had been clued into it already, so telling my buddy like, yeah, it sounds like either sandpaper, which I guess makes sense, sand in the water, or like small popping bubbles or just like rubbing as you're cruising in the water. Yeah, that's a cool sound, isn't it?
There's got to be a term for it. I'm sure some river rat somewhere knows a term for what that's called.
Yeah, that's above my pay grade, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I guess tell me a little bit about the Missouri River, as if I didn't know much, which I really don't. The Mississippi, as far as paddling, the paddling world goes, at least here in the States, long distance paddling, the Mississippi is kind of the bread and butter, I suppose, as far as long trips. And there's still not that many people that do that. I forget what the numbers are. I don't know if you know, but I know it's not that many people that do it every year. And the Missouri is far, 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 far less than that. I think a handful or less. Give it a try. Tell me a little bit about the river.
Yeah. So I think there's, we average about 10, 12, sometimes up to 15 people a year who do the entire Missouri. So I like to keep an eye out to see who's doing it year by year. And Norm Miller of the Missouri River Paddlers does an amazing job kind of keeping that organized, keeping in touch and making sure people have what they need while they're on the river. But I think, for the Missouri itself, probably the first half of the trip, it feels like you're constantly lake hopping. You're going from reservoir to reservoir. You're doing some portages first around a few of the smaller dams where you can kind of manually portage. I had a cart with me, so I was able to kind of wheel the boat around the dams and down to the put-in. And then once you get to some of the big reservoirs, Fort Peck and Lake Sakakawea, Lake Oahe, you're doing either a 2 or 3 mile manual portage, or I was lucky enough to wrangle some help, either prearranged, somebody would drive me around, or a couple times just a random person with a truck. I said, hey, what do you think about taking me down to the put-in? I wasn't a stickler for the guys who like to do it every step of the way manual. So I was out there to just make my way down the river. But I got to say the Missouri River breaks. That's one of the most beautiful stretches of the river. Kind of the Badlands landscape on both sides of the river, and you're paddling through that area, probably 200 miles. Take 4 or 5 days, and you're just miles and miles away from any civilization, any roads, any cars, and it's just you out there. And I managed to hit that about a week before the season actually opened, where there's normally outfitters who run paddle trips and fishermen out there. I hit that about a week before that happened, so I think I saw maybe 1 or 2 other people that entire stretch. So just having that experience in solitude of some of the most beautiful parts of the river. And there was constant, it came to my mind almost every day that, me growing up around the rivers here in St. Louis, it's something we would drive over on the bridge and you look down and say, okay, yeah, big river, cool, great. But then you go to the where the Missouri is in Montana and North Dakota, and you're like, this is the same river. It's almost unbelievable that it's got a different personality, different scenery. It's
totally,
what you think of as like a remote mountain stream, but that's our river. That's the same river that comes down through St. Louis and eventually hits Mississippi and goes in front of the arch. So I always found that fascinating.
Yeah, I agree, man. And just the water that it drains too. I mean, I always enjoyed or like thinking of a trickle of rain hitting some farmer's field, and I guess I don't know where the basin for the Missouri River stops, but somewhere in Montana or wherever, and then I'm making it all the way down, past St. Louis and then on down to the Gulf of Mexico. It's it's a long way and a lot of country.
Yeah, that's one fact that fascinated me as I started prepping for this trip. I was like, well, looking at the map, the water that comes out of the ground at Old Faithful eventually drains into the watershed that becomes the Missouri River. So like me in St. Louis, 10 minutes away from the river, we have a physical connection to these amazing, historic, beautiful places in our country. And it's all connected by waters. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I did the Missouri River breaks. I don't know when it was. Maybe 2015 or 2016. Just a trip with some buddies, and a really awesome stretch of river, like you were saying, real remote, rugged, badlandy is a good description. When I was there, we just so happened, we had no idea it was coming or anything. We were all up late, real late around campfire, and the Northern Lights came out, like 2 or 3 a.m. And that's the only time I've ever seen them. And nice. It was just spectacular. And what a amazing country. And I think one of the cool things you said about tying it all together too with history and such is, the Missouri is unique, one of the most unique rivers. I'm sure there's a lot, but just with the Lewis and Clark history tied into it and the documentation of, exactly where they were, what it looked like, from a firsthand account from that time. Are you interested at all in that stuff? Have you followed any of that stuff? Did it play any part? Did you think about it at all, or not that interested?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I did. I used Dave Miller's book, The Complete Paddler. He wrote an excellent book about his trip down the Missouri. I think it was back in the early 2000s, but I used that, and he quotes and takes passages from Lewis and Clark quite a bit. So I kind of got that sense there. And then I had a copy of Lewis and Clark diaries along the way. And, I would try to, at the end of the day, read the passage from their diaries for the stretch of river that I would be seeing the next day. And it was fascinating to kind of, read that, learn a bit about what their journey looked like. And then the next day you're seeing the exact same scenery, the same sights, same stretch of water that they did. And one of the spots I clearly remember was, I can't recall the specifics, but it was up in Montana, where the Native American tribes were driven across the river, making a run for the Canadian border, and being at that specific spot and just kind of looking around and taking it all in is very cool. I absolutely love the connection to history out there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I always think that is interesting. I'm no Lewis and Clark buff by any means, but I think it's cool to be able to know firsthand that, hey, they stood right here looking at this river, describing this river. Yeah. Did you see, or what was your takeaway from some of the comparisons, if you recall? Do you think it was similar, completely different, whole different world, apples and oranges, or some of the things were still applicable?
Yeah, a lot of the stretches I went through, especially the early part of the trip, you were on some of the big lakes and big reservoirs, and reading about what they saw on those stretches of river, knowing that river, it's about 400 feet below where it is today, and how much it's changed, how much man has done to tame the river and change it and make the river generate power or recreation, or for the multiple reasons all those reservoirs were built. So it has changed so much, but there's plenty of stretches of river that are natural. The one below Yankton, South Dakota, comes to mind, where you have a stretch of 80 to 90 miles of wild and scenic river, sandbars out there, braided channels, and you're seeing the river exactly like Lewis and Clark would have, and dealing with all the challenges they did, shallow water and tree stumps in the water, and fast moving water, rapids and eddies and so forth. So it's a very varied river as well.
It's funny. I've done very, very little Missouri River paddling, but I've also done that stretch. I think that's all the stretches I've done now.
Yeah.
Which is an awesome stretch. When I was living in South Dakota, we went and met up with some buddies and did a 4-night trip on that stretch below Yankton, which, it's just beautiful. Big river, like you said, braided, those like white kind of cliff bluffs. Pretty country.
Mm-hmm.
What did you have a favorite section of the Missouri, or do you? Maybe is a better question. You mentioned the breaks. What other favorite part did you have? Because 2,000 some odd miles, that's a lot of river.
Yeah, the breaks for sure. Gates of the Mountains is always up there. And then the stretch of wild and scenic below Yankton, which I actually got to go back and paddle that with the Missouri River paddlers every couple of years. We all get together for a rendezvous, and we did that 2 years ago. We got back up and paddled the stretch from Yankton down to Sioux City. And so seeing that for a second time, while paddling with a bunch of people who had also done the same trip I did, where we're sharing stories, we're sharing experiences, group of people who have this common yet very uncommon experience, under their belts together. It was just an incredible, difference doing it solo and then doing it with a bunch of like-minded people. So those are probably my favorite stretches, but I also did enjoy the challenges of the big lakes, the big wind and the whitecaps you have to deal with, and a 9-mile crossing of a lake, keeping your eye on the horizon, making sure the weather's not blowing up quickly. So, I think there's challenges and beauty to almost every part of the river.
The Rendezvous, Missouri River Paddlers Rendezvous, I followed that as well. That looked like a blast, and I've had several, more than a handful probably, of people there on the podcast over the years. That sounded like a rowdy, awesome crew. Tell me a little bit about that get together and kind of how it came together and what it was like.
Yeah, so this was my first one. They've been doing it, I don't know how many years, but they've had several different rendezvous in different parts, different stretches of the river. And again, Norm Miller does a wonderful job of kind of organizing it. And we had lots of local support as well. A lot of the South Dakota paddling community really helped us out with some of the portaging and providing foods and organizing campsites for us along the way. And it was just a 5-day party of stories, music, drinking, sitting around a fire, exchanging stories, exchanging tales from our trip. It was just nonstop sensory overload with just everything that river rats love. So we need to get you out on the next one that we do.
Absolutely, man. I would love it. It brings me to my next question, which I've had. So I started this, I think, in 2020, which is crazy. It's 2024. So, 4 years, or at least coming up on 4 years, doing the podcast. And I've had several favorite guests, but one of my favorite guests is my man, Towhead Steve.
Yes.
Who has paddled the Missouri and is just a wild man and
what a character.
Just the absolute best. Did you meet Towhead Steve at that rendezvous?
Yes, I did. And yeah, he is an ultimate river guy. He's a character. He would sing us dirges that he's learned over the years and tell stories. And I was with a good buddy of mine, Connor, he had actually he was in the middle of paddling the whole Missouri, and he got to St. Louis and he planned on going to New Orleans. And so I said, hey, what do you say you join me? We'll drive up and do the rendezvous, and then you can continue on down to New Orleans after that. And he joined me on the trip, and there were a few times where Towhead Steve would get going with a story or a song, and I'd just look over at Connor, and we would both just like this guy is incredible. Yeah, Towhead Steve.
Yeah, man, that was one of my favorite episodes of this podcast. Guy's a character. I got to get him back on, and because it's just the tip of the iceberg. You could let that guy talk for 5 hours and be entertained.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's cool, the community in it. Those Facebook pages certainly play a big part in that, huh? Both the Mississippi River paddlers and the Missouri River paddlers seem like some of the kind of anchor points of the long distance paddling community, at least online from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. There's incredible resources to have, wide community of people who know the river, live on the river, provide support to paddlers. It's an incredible resource. I think there's something to be said, for people who are undertaking these types of trips. It is totally up to you how much you want to reach out and take advantage of the river community. You could, feasibly, Mississippi especially, less so on the Missouri, but you could probably stay at someone's house most nights along the way if you wanted to. Or you could just, go at your own, make it your own trip. You could camp out every night as well. So I think that's the beauty of it. If people are thinking about doing these types of long river trips, think about what kind of trip you want to have. What kind of experience do you want to have? What are you really out there to do? What are the experiences that you're going to value and remember the rest of your life? You don't have to do it one way because somebody else did it that way. Do it your own way. You know what you like, you know what you feel, and just make it your own.
Amen. What was your style of trip? On mine, I'm going to guess, and you can fill me in after, but I'm going to guess our styles are relatively similar, just judging by your days here. But Missouri River's longer and tougher than the Mississippi. I did the Mississippi in 90 days, and I was stopping in, I was in no huge rush. I was stopping in towns, meeting people. Yep. If I had to pull towards a certain town or city, I would stay an extra night. What was the style, or how would you describe your kind of, style of trip?
Yeah, it was a good mix. I was in, pretty good contact with the River Angels along the way. I started pretty early in the year. I think it was mid-May when I started. And for the first 2 weeks, it was very cold and you had some pretty serious rain. I missed the snow, luckily, but some of the first couple weeks, I was lucky enough to stay with a few River Angels. Shout out to Jim Emanuel. Just outside Helena, Montana. I think I stayed at his house for like 4 nights in a row. And every night I'd be in a warm bed and hear pounding wind and rain. And it was like 35 degrees outside. I'm like, I am so happy I'm here. But other than that, I did a ton of camping. I probably camped 75% of the time, but like you, if I was approaching a town, I'd take advantage of it, get some good food, fill my supplies. If there's a friendly face around or somebody who I had contacted on the Facebook group or otherwise to meet up with, I never really said no to any help that somebody wanted to offer me. So yeah, having the chance to kind of rough it on your own, but also meet these amazing folks along the way who are just interested in helping you continue along the way and provide you with what you need is, to me, that was the best way to do it, is a great mix of kind of both sides of it.
How wild is the Missouri River? You think about, or not you, but often people think about America, and you think about these great wildernesses of Yellowstone and Yosemite, and I don't know, some people often think wildernesses are shrinking or not there, or the Amazon's being cut down. I don't know how wild is it? What's your take on just like the state of the Missouri River? Is it wilderness? Is it degraded? Is it polluted? Is it clean? Is it beautiful? What's your overall take on the length of America's longest river?
Yeah, that's a great question. I never really had the sense that this is a dirty river or it's overly developed, overly polluted. When you're going through some of the larger cities, you do hit the pockets of industrial civilization on the sides of the river, but it's a fairly clean river. I want to give a shout out to Missouri River Relief. I do some trash cleanups with them, and they do incredible work in trash cleanups and education around the Missouri River, closer to here to Missouri. But I think the river is healthy for the most part. There is some very interesting ongoing sagas around some of the dams as well. I had a chance to stay near Lewis and Clark Lake, and the fact that lake is continually filling up with sediment. And I don't know the exact figures, but over the next 50 years, if nothing is done, that entire lake will be filled with sediment, and then the dam will fail. So there's sort of this ongoing challenge to solve some real key issues around the river, whether that's environmentally, wildlife, navigation. There's always the debate of, do we turn the Missouri back over to its wildest form, remove all the wing dikes and let nature take back over, versus keeping the river open for barge traffic. So there's constant debates, and I love reading about it and digging into stuff like that just to kind of see what the evolution of the river will be.
How about wildlife along your journey? Did you see much? Did you have any encounters that come to mind?
Nothing too crazy. I did come around a bend near Three Forks, pulling into Three Forks, and there was a big moose staring out at me from the bank. Just paddle right by him, and lots of bird, pelican wildlife. Tons of bald eagles. It got to watch some eagles hunting in action, so that was pretty cool. And then one of the times I was on one of the big lakes, and I came around this bend that was. It was totally, there was a cliff, and then below the cliff, there was a small little gravel spot, and there was what I thought was like a cow. And I got a little closer, and it looked like a young buffalo. And as I approached, you could tell he was sick. Like he had flies around him, and his eyes were kind of white and glassy, like he was blind, and he was totally lost and disoriented and basically trapped on this tiny little gravel bar next to the river. Nothing I could do. I couldn't get too close because it was thrashing around pretty dangerously. I think like the next day when I pulled into like this campground, I told some local, I said, hey, there's this like buffalo that is, if not dead already, it's in a bad way. And I kind of told them where it's at. So I don't know if they ever did anything about that, but
coyote meal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's probably the case. Yeah.
What was your camping? What were you looking for in a perfect camp spot, or how were you camping often?
Yeah, that's a good question. 2019 was a very high water year, and actually, I was leading up to the trip. I didn't know if my trip would have to be delayed or possibly canceled completely because it was a massive snowpack in Montana. And once that started melting, the rivers rose, the reservoirs were full, and we had very damaging flooding down closer to, through Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. So while that flooding was going on is when I was driving up to Montana to start my trip. So I didn't really know how it was going to be. One bright spot of having high water is, of course, is faster water when I did have current. So that was nice. And then with the reservoirs being so full, when I paddled to shore to camp along a reservoir, on a typical year, there may be a ton of mud or sediment that you have to wade through to get to a camp spot. But the water was at its very peak. So basically I could paddle over to a patch of grass or to dry land that had not been touched by water in many, many years. So that was a silver lining in terms of camping, and just some of the beautiful campsites set up on some of those reservoirs. I always like to pull off paddling around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Usually got an early start, and so that gave me plenty of time to just sit, relax, make some dinner, have my one finger of whiskey before I went to bed, but just, taking in the scenery and the serenity of the river.
Yeah, that's the best, man. You're all set up. You got a fire going, all the chores for the day are done. The tent's up, the sleeping pad is blown up. Food's either cooking or done, and just sitting and relaxing, watching the river flow by. That's the best, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What as you got towards the end of the trip, were you itching to get off? Were you ready? Were you ready to head down to New Orleans and take this thing on down to the Gulf? What was your state of mind as you were closing in towards home, which is St. Louis for you?
So I think once I remember passing Omaha and getting closer to the state line of Missouri, and I remember the first night I camped on basically as far northwest in Missouri you can get. And I pulled over on shore and texted my friends and family. I said, I'm in Missouri. I was excited to be there, mainly because I knew that for the rest of the trip, I was going to be among my paddling community in parts of the river that I knew so well, having paddled from Kansas City to St. Louis many times. And sure enough, got to Kansas City, stayed with some friends, and then the next morning I paddled with 3 or 4 of mine from Kansas City who have done the 340 and 340 veterans, and we did a 70-mile day from Kansas City, just exchanging stories and catching up and talking about all things paddling. And I had a lot of company between Kansas City and St. Louis, so familiar sights, familiar faces that made it a great homecoming. And then actually on my last night, I camped just north of St. Louis, and I had about 30 or 40 friends and family come out and meet me at this park. And we camped out, had a campfire, wonderful time. And then I had 7 or 8 of my friends paddle with me the last 15 miles from the Missouri onto the Mississippi down to the Arch. And, I try to meet people finishing the Missouri when I can, when they're done, just because I know how cool it is to have somebody at the end with a hug and with a cold beer and a hearty congratulations. And I had about probably 50 or 60 friends and family at the Arch waiting for me.
Awesome.
My mom was sitting there in 90-degree heat for 2 hours waiting to come in. So I was like, Mom, thank you for waiting for me. But it was an incredible homecoming. I was very lucky to be St. Louis based and have that opportunity.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome. And I don't know if maybe you're clicking a mouse, but it's picking up just a little tapping sometimes.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the paddling community, it's I guess it probably ties back into the racing that you got into. And that's one aspect of the paddling that I haven't really delved into. Tell me a little bit about A, how you got into it, but B, just give me a rundown on the MR340, because that's one that seems to come up all the time in races that kind of changes people and changes their perspective. And yeah, I guess just tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, that was my intro to paddle racing, a 340-mile race, which can be considered ultra marathon paddle racing, and that was my first one. It's probably not the route most people go; they work their way up to that, but that's kind of, I just jumped in head first there, and then there's so many other races that are put on by great organizations: Midwest Paddle Racing, Missouri River Relief, Missouri Stream Teams. They all do like their own versions of different races, a lot shorter than the 340. But there's a great series of races that lead up to the MR340 that people use as training runs, anywhere from 30-mile paddles up to 60, I think. And then we do a annual race on the Merrimack. Alpine Shop in St. Louis puts that on, and it's another just fantastic river near St. Louis. It's a lot smaller than the big rivers, but some of those races you get a little bit more technical, make some tight turns and deal with some rapids and so forth. But again, just the folks you meet out paddling. I paddle with a Tuesday night group at one of our local lakes, and there are some speed demons there. We try to break our records, and that's the thing. I think once you get a kayak and you see people paddling nicer, faster kayaks, you're like, how can I get a faster boat? It's a dangerous pattern to get into. I have a one in, one out policy with my wife for boats, basically.
Ah, man, don't let mine hear that. So the MR340, Missouri River 340, 340 miles, absolute continuous race. So you start and you finish. How long is an average race, or what are your times? And from my understanding, you don't sleep. You paddle 340 miles straight on the Missouri River.
Yes.
And it's nuts.
Yeah, there's all manners and styles of racers for that race. There's people who, stay in the boat for 30, 40 continuous hours. And those are the people who are, in it to win it. I've never been one of those. A lot of other folks, they plan, they paddle all day, camp at night for, get a few hours of sleep and get back to it. I think night paddling on the Missouri is one of the coolest things you can ever do. So I embrace the opportunity to paddle through the night, if at all possible. A lot of the races the MR340s I've done, I like to get at least 2-3 hours of sleep a night. I don't function very well on zero sleep. So I think my first few years I was in the 70-ish hour range on my finishes. And then the last one I did was my fastest. I think I did it in about 55 hours. So I don't know physically if I can get much faster than that. So this coming year, I actually signed up again for the race, and I'm going to be captaining a 14-person dragon boat canoe. So
oh my God.
That'll be a new way of doing the race. I'm really looking forward to it.
That sounds awesome. How long do you expect that one to take?
I don't know. We have our first meeting tomorrow with the people in the boat. So it's sort of a hodgepodge of people from across Missouri, and some who have paddled the 340, others who haven't. So I think once we kind of get to know each other and the style of people's goals and how comfortable they are in the boat and with sleep and stops and so forth, we'll come up with a plan, but we're not going to be setting any records. That's for sure.
Having never done it or never done a canoe or kayak race for that matter, you have to imagine, I know there's different categories for boats and for age, I assume. But, you have to imagine how big is the variability between, somebody who's going for gold in the nicest like surf ski versus even in, I don't know, are surf skis their own category? What are the fastest boats, and how big is the difference between the fastest boat and either an average boat or the fastest boat? And I guess the core of the question is, how much does the paddler matter in the fastest boats?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's kind of complex. The MR340 has different divisions and different boat types. And then some of the smaller races will actually have very defined divisions, age range, boat length, male, female, things like that. But I think with the cool thing about the MR340 is pretty much any human powered paddlecraft is legal. You have surf skis, you have canoes. Somebody a few years ago, 4 guys paddled a John boat in the race.
That sounds tough.
A lot of homemade boats you see out there, and then some of the Frankenstein contraptions of recent years, these pedal-powered boats that just fly through the water. So if somebody can imagine a boat and build it, they can race it. So that's one of the very cool things about the MR340.
And what are the typical winners? What are they paddling?
A lot of times it's some of the surf ski folks, and then there's a new company called Riverhawk Boat Shop in Kansas City. Joe Mann and his crew, they build some incredible light carbon fiber razor blades, basically, and those boats have taken home a lot of the top awards the past few years.
Interesting.
Those
I don't
boats
know about those.
Yeah, look it up. Riverhawk kayaks. Most of them have an outrigger, and I think last year Joe built a four-man Riverhawk, and he had incredible paddlers in that boat, and they put together, I don't know the exact time, but they just crushed it. So
wow.
Yeah, I think there's you get introduced to the race and you have your own style, but I think in a lot of people's minds, especially competitive folks, they start thinking, how can I get faster? Whether that's my boat, my training, my nutrition, my people that I paddle with. So there's all kinds of ways to get faster, and it's a really cool aspect.
Yeah, it is. I respect the heck out of it, but I think for me, it's a little much.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I want to do it just to get tied into the community and hooked up with the community. But also, I could see myself doing it trying to set a pace, but camping and enjoying it. I don't need even 3 hours of sleep. That seems a little rough for me, but
Yeah.
What's the there's got to be like a sweeper boat or what's the longest time that you could do it and still be a finisher? Obviously it's a race, so.
Yeah, I think they set the max at 85 hours, and there is a sweeper boat called the Reaper, and that's always fun stories from folks. They're paddling into a ramp, and the Reaper is just ahead of them. And the rule is if the Reaper gets to a checkpoint ahead of you, you're out of the race. So the Reaper, they do encourage paddlers. So somebody, they're sprinting the last mile to get ahead of the Reaper and get into the ramp in time. And then there's tons of safety boats out there along the way who they don't help you out with gear or physically, but they're always encouraging, watching out. They're announcing if there's barges arriving or if there's a storm coming. So Missouri River Leaf, the whole crew does a great job of organizing the race, keeping people safe, and generally happy on the river.
That's awesome. So the MR340 is one of the big ones. Do you have another, it sounds like you've done a few different races. Do you have another one that is kind of a 1B, or not a 1B, but maybe a quieter one that you really enjoy?
Yeah, I mentioned the Merrimack Paddle Marathon. That's usually on a different stretch of the Merrimack every year.
And where's that? That's in Missouri?
Yeah, yep. It's a river just, comes out of the Ozarks and dumps out to the Mississippi just below St. Louis, but we do different stretches of that river. And then one that I have done the last 2 years is a newer race up in Minnesota. We refer to it as the MR 150. It's the two paddles, canoe and kayak race weekend. Scott Miller, who's a pretty notorious paddler himself, he kind of organizes that race, and I got to do that race last year on a stretch of the Mississippi up near Brainerd down to the Twin Cities. And yeah, again, the feeling of, wow, the Mississippi up there is such a different river than what I see here in St. Louis. So yeah, that I do want to explore more of the Mississippi, and that race is fantastic. Scott does a great job with that one. Yeah,
that one seems up my alley. And yeah, when you said that about the river in Montana, the Missouri and Montana earlier, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, yeah, the Mississippi at the headwaters, it's when I show people photos of it, it's like just blows the mind. It's just a tiny little creek,
Yeah.
What's the paddling in Missouri like around your neck of the woods, like the backyard paddles or, the local paddles outside of the big river there, the Mighty Miss and the Missouri?
Yeah, so I do a lot of paddling on the big rivers, and we're so lucky. There's a lot of great side channels to explore and check out, probably within an hour of St. Louis, and then the Merrimack River. I like to go out, Upper Merrimack is gorgeous, all spring-fed, clean, clear water. And then we have our Ozark streams, the Current, the Jack's Fork. Usually I like to take multiple days to do those. You can get out and camp on some sandbars and just really enjoy some of the pretty far-flung, pristine spots there. So I feel like St. Louis is a very well-kept, underrated secret in terms of paddling opportunities. And some people take a look at our big rivers in Mississippi, Missouri, and they can't imagine that people actually paddle kayaks or canoes on those rivers. But that's always been a passion of mine, is telling people about what is possible and getting them out there on the river to experience themselves.
Amen, man. You and me both. It's a beautiful river, and it's a vast wilderness right there for us to explore. And it's so funny that, I don't know if funny is the right word, maybe sad that people just don't even give it a second thought. It's just a big ditch,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you ever paddled across the river from you there, the lower catch, however you say it, like the swamp, kind of cypress swamp type stuff down there in southern Illinois?
Yes, I have had the chance to get down there, the Cache River area, southern Illinois. Yeah, it's the northernmost cypress swamp in the U.S. So a couple times I've gotten to go down there, and you paddle in and out of these massive cypress trees. And if you didn't know any better, you'd think you're down in like New Orleans or Florida or something. But it's in southern Illinois. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's high on my list. I had a guy on not too long ago who does a lot of stuff down in that area. He's from Metropolis, Illinois.
Yeah.
And that one's been high on my list for a while. I need to get down there. And it's funny how different southern Illinois is from northern Illinois. I'm up here like 45 minutes from the Wisconsin border, and it's a whole different world. Downstate often gets forgotten about in the politics and just general life of Illinois, but
absolutely,
there's beautiful stuff down there.
Yeah.
What do you got coming up, man? We'll wind her down here a little bit, but are you looking forward to anything paddling wise or outdoor wise coming up?
So one of the things I'm kind of helping organize is during the eclipse in April, we have the opportunity to be in the path of totality between St. Louis down to Cape Girardeau. So I'm helping organize a trip with Missouri River paddlers. There's people flying in from Montana, East Coast.
Really?
And we're going to take a couple days and paddle, probably only about 30 miles on the Mississippi, but finishing in Cape Girardeau. And we plan to be on a wide open sandbar during the eclipse, weather willing, of course, but we'll pray for open skies that day. But that'll be sort of a mini rendezvous. Some of the characters from my paddling past and part of the community will come together, and we'll have a great time for a couple of days. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
Man, that sounds awesome. I'd kind of heard about that, but hadn't put it at the forefront. And to know it's right near me as well. That it sounds like a blast. So that'll be cool. You do some blogging, or you write some stuff about your trips, and there's stuff at what is it, Paddle St. Louis? Yeah,
paddlestlouis.com. I don't normally keep it up as like what I'm doing from day to day, but I do have all of my blogs, articles from my Missouri River trip, and I've shared that out with folks as a resource who are planning on doing the Missouri or want to get more information about a particular section. So I do my MR340 race recaps on there as well. So in terms of just trying to document some of my paddling exploits, I put that out there, paddlestlouis.com.
Very cool. Anything you want to leave us with? Final thoughts? Anything you didn't get off your chest?
I'll say I'm a huge micro adventure guy. So, I love listening to your podcasts and hearing folks on these epic adventures, multi-month trips, doing crazy stuff all over the U.S., all over the world. But I'm a huge fan of micro adventures. There's you Google the term, there's tons out there about it. Alistair Humphreys is a great author who preaches the gospel of micro adventures, of which I'm a huge follower. Basically, finding adventures close to home. You think your area is boring, but there's cool stuff to be seen everywhere. So I try to make a point of that. Get out and see some of the cool things around your area. Go explore more deeply your area where you live, the rivers around you, the wilderness, and just seeing what's out there, and not have to fly halfway across the world to do something epic. So I'm a huge fan of that, and I'll continue to live my micro adventure lifestyle.
Heck yeah. And actually that reminds me, not going to wind it down quite yet, but your 24-hour adventure, tell me about this. Is it a race? Is it a competition? Is it none of the above? What is it? And start there.
Yeah, great. Good question. In addition to paddling, I've sort of been a runner, not a serious type of runner my whole life, but just kind of as a hobby, way to keep in shape. But during COVID, everything got shut down, all races, 5Ks, anywhere where there's a crowd gathering, you couldn't do. So a friend of mine and I kind of came up with this concept of how far could you get from your front door in 24 hours using only your legs. And so we started this in 2021, I think was the first one, coming out of COVID. And basically the rules are very straightforward. You leave your front door and you go as far away from your house in a 24-hour period as possible using only your legs, no wheels, no motors, no cars. And we measure the distance straight line as the crow flies. So you can't just go around your block for the full 24 hours. You have to go straight out, and it's extremely varied based off of where you live and how you're able to plan your route and navigate a safe route, that may or may not have places to stop along the way to refuel, get food, stop and sleep for a bit or whatever. So it's a very wide open adventure. We've done it 4 times now. And some of the stories from what people experience on that is incredible. And I think the hook, the moment I mention this race and this concept to folks, their mind immediately starts working. Oh, okay, I could take this road from my house and then I'll go over here and then I can go this way. Okay, cool. And once they start thinking that way and they start telling me about what their route's going to be, I know I got them. They're in. So we'll continue to do it. It's a cool concept. So I hope to continue to do that as long as I can.
That's awesome. When do you do it? And is there any kind of formality to it, or is it just you and a bunch of buddies?
It is basically open to anyone worldwide. We've had people compete from across the world. A friend of mine in Singapore actually competed. Let me make sure I get the dates
no worries.
here for you. But we do it in October, usually when the weather is not so hot and it's not so cold yet. And we try to do it on a full moon as well, just so you have more light if you do choose to go through the night. But this next one's going to be October 17th through 20th in 2024. So more info on that, 24hfhchallenge.com. So I'll have registration and stuff up there.
Awesome. hfhchallenge.com.
24hfh challenge. Yeah.
24. Okay. Awesome, man. Yeah, that's a great concept. I love that. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do it this year. I'm going to be on the Green River in Utah at that time, but
oh man,
next year I'm in.
Too. Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That sounds great. What have been some of the distances that people have gone?
The first year I tried it, actually, I made my way down to Chester, Illinois, right along the Mississippi. Actually, I was on the levees for a lot of that, and it wasn't the most efficient route. I think as the crow flies, I did 54 miles, and total distance I did 74 miles.
Wow.
So that was the longest I had ever gone, and probably the longest I'll ever go again. But we've had anywhere from a friend of mine who walked 1.5 miles to the bar near his house. And then I've had this ultra runner, Justin, participate in the last couple of years, and he does ultra marathons. He did 100 miles in 24 hours, and that was just incredible to watch. So it's open to all skill levels and all ambition levels. So yeah.
Awesome, man. That's great. That's a neat project. Well, Mark, I appreciate your time. It's been great chatting, and maybe we'll have to do it again sometime. If nothing else, we'd love to get on the water with you someday. We'd be awesome to make it happen.
Yep, that'd be great. Yeah, well, if we got the next rendezvous coming up, I'll give you a shout, or I see some of your trips that you organize too look incredible as well.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Thanks. Take care, and paddle on, man.
Thanks, Will.
And there you have it. That is episode 85 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Mark Fingerhut. Thanks for tuning in yet again. Don't forget to share the podcast with an adventure buddy if you're enjoying the show. It really helps us to grow. Canoecopia coming up March 8th and March 9th. I will be there giving speeches. Got guided trips I'm offering at buffaloroamer.com. Check those out. Would love to get on the river with you. If nothing else, go get outside, get some fresh air, and see you downriver.